an Italian bank named Intesa, which is actually primarily a retail bank. They're not usually involved in high-risk bridge lending. Intesa Bank gave the financing. Singapore, the ambassador of Singapore was there. And that is where the investment vehicle is headquartered, in Singapore. And then the ambassador of the Philippines, and the Philippines actually, their involvement is a little more tangential, but it's a little unusual in the sense that they've been an American ally for decades. I'm not going to go into the history of it, but they've been an American ally for decades. Since World War II, they became independent, but they were, an American colony, essentially, for the first half of the 20th century. And they suddenly, for the first time in January, allowed a Russian ship to port in Manila, and they're suddenly becoming close to Russia. Duterte, the new leader of the Philippines, and you can read CNN about this, he compares himself to Adolf Hitler. Not a very nice guy. So anyways...
Right, and he talks about executing drug dealers. He wants to execute drug dealers. And even with all that...
That's just a pretext.
Trump still endorses this guy.
They just call somebody a drug dealer and, okay, we're going to kill you now.
Right. And Trump still endorses this guy. For what reason? Obviously, Mr. Stern is going to tell us.
Trump doesn't endorse him.
No.
Trump's getting ready to go visit him, and there's a trip planned from November 3rd through the 14th. It is disgusting.
I almost forgot.
Yeah. This guy is bad news. Okay, so those are the 4 ambassadors that showed up. And
Qatar was there too, right?
Who?
Qatar.
No. Ambassador of Qatar was not there,
okay,
that we know. Qatar was involved, but not there. So anyway, you have that big to-do, and then there's kind of like a quiet period in the timeline. And this is just all based on the dossier and what's important for the dossier. Then, right before the Republican convention in Cleveland, in early July, Carter Page, one of the foreign policy advisors that nobody had ever heard of, who happens to be a New York University professor, an energy consultant, and a Russophile, whose office at 590 Madison has a very, very, people didn't realize this, but 590 Madison actually connects to Trump's building on Fifth Avenue. So that's kind of interesting. That's how a lot of, like there's meetings that happen during the transition and people were like, how did that person get in there? Like that would be the way to sneak in without going through the front door of the Trump building. And he had his offices there. So anyway, that happened. And then about 2 weeks later, Kislyak visited with J.D. Gordon at the RNC and changed the item on Ukraine in their campaign platform, which actually was part of the Trump-Russia dossier. And there's a story I wrote about that in OccupyDemocrats.com, which was a real scoop. Literally all Rachel Maddow did a couple days later was just reread our story, add whatever recent developments were, and her entire show blew up. I mean, people went from like, oh, this Russia thing, we don't know what to believe. Maybe we should take Van Jones's word for it. It's a nothing burger. And it went from nothing burger to 100 miles per hour after that. And it was an exclusive that we figured out. CNN had reported J.D. Gordon, who, by the way, if you're following the news this week, if you've seen photographs of the convicted advisor, George Papadopoulos,
right,
along with Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump, Sessions is in the left side of that photograph, that famous photograph from March 31st. Then the man immediately to his left with the very, very unfashionable aquamarine tie, that is J.D. Gordon, and then immediately to his left would be Papadopoulos, and then the rest of the table.
Wait, let me ask you a question, because Papadopoulos, when Trump first described him, he described him as an oil and gas man. So how deep is he connected in this deal?
Well, we actually don't know. But what I can tell you is he's very well connected in that field. And I just wrote a story about him on the sternfact.com yesterday, not to go too far afield. But before he became a campaign advisor, he had already met the president of Cyprus and the prime minister of the United Arab Emirates, which is, of course, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and the other 5 kingdoms. He met the president of Greece during the campaign, and Trump's surrogate Mark Caputo keeps screaming that while he doesn't have any official role with the campaign or the White House, he somehow knows that it was an unauthorized trip. I tend not to believe that. But Papadopoulos did meet with some of the major players, and when you talk about energy, Cyprus has they found gas off of Cyprus. And there's also a gas field off of Israel. It's called the Leviathan gas field. Israel has been discussing with Russia exploiting this thing. Cyprus did a whole series of auctions, which concluded at the end of last year, and the day before Rex Tillerson accepted the job as Secretary of State, Cyprus awarded the final parcel in their gas field to Exxon, surprisingly. So we don't know how much George is really involved in all the rest of this dossier stuff, but he certainly was recruited. He certainly had enough gravitas to meet with some world leaders on his own. And I would say 100% he had the capacity to set up the kind of meeting that he was suggesting to the campaign to bring Trump and Putin together. And as you saw in the French elections, Marine Le Pen flew straight to Moscow to have a nice meeting with Trump. Thought it would be a good photo op, I guess. So,
wait, Le Pen met with Putin?
Yes.
You said Trump.
during the home stretch of the campaign.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So those changes to the GOP platform, I mean, they cannot be underestimated.
Right.
They were a very big deal. No, at the time, there was a mass confusion. Everybody denied things. Paul Manafort denied it coming from the Trump campaign. The Trump campaign denied that it came from the Trump campaign. GOP party activists said, yes, it was Trump. In fact, it was the only thing that the Trump campaign changed about the platform, which is amazing when you think about it.
Yeah.
It's a big platform. So that was a big deal. And you see some funny things happen after the RNC. Okay. Now, as we all infamously know, on the 27th of July last year, Donald Trump asked Putin in public for emails. Now, we're going to skip the dossier for a second and just work backwards into the news that we've learned since March. Okay? So on July 27th, he asks Putin very publicly, release the emails. Well, now we know that Papadopoulos was pushing and saying that they had the emails all the way back in early April, which was months before anybody knew on June 14th that the DNC had been hacked. That's when the Washington Post reported it. Okay? So then, you keep going forward from April, and then in May, well, I don't know about May, but in June, you have the meeting with the meeting in Trump Tower with, Rinat Akhmetshin, the former Soviet military intelligence officer turned lobbyist. You have, Natalia Veselnitskaya there, Rob Goldstone, Ike Kavaladze, a man who laundered over $1 billion in the 1990s, and is the right-hand man to Russian real estate magnate. They call him the Trump of Russia, Aris Agalarov. And he, Goldstone is, of course, the manager to Emin Agalarov, his son.
All right.
They all have that meeting on June 9th. Still, at this point, the Trump campaign is now known for 2 months and had a direct meeting with people who were sent by the Kremlin about this non-public information. Nobody knows. And just to, I want to take it one step further. Rep. Dana Rohrabacher traveled to Russia and met with Cheka, and he met with railway baron Viktor Yakunin. Why is that important? Yuri Cheka is the prosecutor general of Russia. He's the equivalent of the head of the DOJ for them. Okay? And he had a little dossier, and he gave that dossier to Dana Rohrabacher and said, look, we need you to put this Magnitsky fellow on trial again. Now, this is a very popular thing for Russia to do because of Putin and because of the sanctions. They don't like this Magnitsky fellow very much because he uncovered a massive fraud committed by people involved in the Russian railway system. Well, Viktor Yakunin was the head of the railway system. All right? Veselnitskaya was defending those people who committed the fraud. in a New York court at the time that all these meetings happened. All right? So the links go, it's like, literally they railroaded Trump. Because all the people involved were from the Russian railways. And over there, railways are even more important than they are here because you have smaller, more urban population centers and then vast expanses where everybody just takes a railroad to get around. You ship things here and there by rail. And in fact, Yakunin was so influential that Canada refused to sanction him when the United States sanctioned Mr. Yakunin several years back because he was the buyer. He's the guy who bought everything from Bombardier, their railways company. So anyways, you have this coterie of people, and Yakunin is extremely close to Putin. He's got the intelligence agency training, and he quit becoming an unofficial advisor in 2015. There was a concocted excuse, public, his son applied for a British passport. Now this guy can't be the head of the railways. He's already a billionaire, siphoned off a ton of money. This is all happening, like, behind the scenes, and nobody in the public, except for the Trump campaign, knows that that's going on. Okay, but their search for the emails started in April, culminated with a June meeting. We don't know everything that's happened since then, but then a couple of days later, June 16th, Mr. Yakunin went on CNBC to endorse Donald Trump. At the same time, Mrs. Veselinskaya went to a hearing that Mr. Rohrabacher had chaired. They had dinner together. They went and showed a propaganda film, and Rohrabacher went and attended the propaganda film screening. A propaganda film that was so obviously Russian propaganda that when they tried to screen it in the EU, there was a scandal, and the screening got canceled. But Dana Rohrabacher didn't care. He went out and, hung out with these folks. So that's like what's happening in June of last year, in the run-up to the RNC. It's mind-blowing that this is all going on, and they still pretend like there's no links to Russia, for the whole rest of the campaign. So, again, knowing what we know now that we didn't know then, last August, Peter Smith, a Republican operative, was also engaged in the hunt for Russian emails and trying to authenticate things, and speaking with Russian hackers. Roger Stone was also speaking with Russian hackers. And, he had an intermediary with WikiLeaks, and they're saying things like it's Podesta's time in the barrel. I mean, all of this is just public indications that they knew something was going on. They believed it to all be, probably they all thought it was going to be Hillary Clinton's 30,000 emails. There's probably what they thought they were going at. So anyways, back to Rosneft, which is fascinating to me.
No, yes.
They actually announced that the sale was frozen right after Donald Trump went insane and started attacking Khizr Khan, the Gold Star father who spoke at the Democratic National Convention. All right? I mean, they froze the sale. Even though this was something they needed, like they needed the money. They needed that cash for their budget. I mean, it's not like maybe, they needed it. It's like you need that money to close the gap. Otherwise, you start defaulting on obligations, your currency could be devalued, your credit rating drops. And when you're a sovereign nation and these things happen, it isolates you further from the economic trade of the world. It makes it tougher to get ahead. You want to borrow money, it's double digits. It's like you can't function the way you want to. Trade credit dries up. It impacts the private businesses. And in Russia, what has happened is they have quietly returned to the old Soviet system, except that instead of like in Soviet Russia, where the state owned 100% of everything, they have a few private partners, and then they have a few private individuals who are the oligarchs, who are the state's partners. They're the overseers. So, and then the rest goes to the state. And, that money balances their budget. I mean, it's a socialist system. It's a national socialist system, as in a merger of corporate power with the state, i.e. fascism.
Wait, but do you believe that the Russians froze this sale, this privatization deal, because of the Gold Star family?
Well, I believe that they thought it was